Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe podcast. Today, Riki, Sarah, and myself will be talking about The Clone Wars, the end of Season 2, episodes 18 through 22. All that and more after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. My name is Matthew. I'm joined, as always, for these episode-by-episode rewatches of The Clone Wars by Riki and Sarah Hayashi. How are you folks doing tonight?
Hey, Matthew.
We're doing fantastic. We have 5 whole episodes to talk about, and maybe 2 of them are interesting.
Yeah. This isn't we're kind of wrapping up the end of Season 2. We are wrapping up Season 2. This is the final 5. 5 is more than we've done, but basically it's 2 different arcs, and each of the arcs has some very interesting moments and some not so great moments. If nothing else, we finally understand why this season's called The Rise of the Bounty Hunter, because we see one bounty hunter starting to rise and then kind of get pushed back again. But he starts to rise, at least, so we have something. But yeah, let's start with following up on our discussion of Seven Samurai in Space. Clearly there was a great love of 1950s and 60s Japanese cinema this season, because now we have a Godzilla movie in space with the, just to try and hide the topic, it's not called Godzilla, it's called the Zillo Beast. Clearly no one got that reference until the giant monster with this large head of a lizard that was awoken by a weapons test and then starts climbing buildings to throw a King Kong in there.
And starts literally like, making
exactly.
the cry.
Let me quickly give the plot summary and then let's talk about it. The Republic's newest droid-annihilating proton bomb awakens a monstrous, gargantuan, and near-invincible beast from its underground hibernation. Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker face a dilemma. Do they save the beast as the last of its kind, or do they help the Dugs kill it and secure a treaty for critical fuel supplies? They go round and round on this. They find that the Emperor Palpatine wants them to kill the beast. They don't want to. They want to preserve life, as it's killing lots of life itself. They want to ensure that the Dugs don't get to kill it after they have woken up it and let it start killing the Dugs. And then we move into the second episode. And at the end of the first episode, they find a way to put it to sleep. And so the Dugs believe that it's been killed. And their hope is that it's now going to be transported to another planet. Instead, however, we find out it's being transported to, Coruscant for more study.
The most densely populated planet in the galaxy is where you want to take your giant monster.
Yeah, and so then we transition out of Godzilla and into King Kong.
Yeah, so the beast is brought home. It's brought to Coruscant in hopes of learning the secret of some impenetrable armor. But it, in a total shock and surprise that no one would have ever guessed, breaks free. We've numerous times heard it referred to as not intelligent, but clearly it recognizes that Emperor Palpatine is the one who wants it dead and is attacking pictures of Palpatine hanging in the city and stuff like that.
And then knows which building to go to.
Yes.
Can read a map.
And so as the clones prepare to kill it with poison gas, the Jedi are again trapped in a moral conflict between the value of its life and that of the planet's civilian populace. Palpatine actually seems to have really miscalculated because he gets very close to being killed himself. But of course the Jedi save the day and they kill it. And then in the very last moment of the episode, we find out that Emperor Palpatine has decided to make lemonade from lemons because he has told the scientist who's been in charge of all this thing that he wants to clone the beast. So.
Which never...
Yeah, which is the last we hear of it, right? We never get back to that.
Spoilers.
Yeah, that's certainly true. So what's your take on Godzilla in space?
Yeah, it's Godzilla in space. It's, I think, Mace Windu at, peak dickiness through most of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mace becomes important after this in the Boba Fett arc. So I think they had to kind of set him up as more than just a guy at the council who talks occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because I always wonder, why are we getting these Jedis paired up? Why isn't Ahsoka here? Why isn't this Obi-Wan?
Right.
So we get Mace, and apparently he's not a very good diplomat, because when they first discover the beast, or when they first excavate the hole, Mace is like, all right, Anakin, you stay here and negotiate this treaty while I go on this adventure with the clones.
Right.
So Anakin has higher diplomacy than Mace, apparently.
Yeah.
Just-
I do like him in these episodes, but it does make me wonder, like, when they make these decisions, how much of it is because these are the characters they thought would be best? How much of it's because they just haven't used this character enough and so they want to? How much of it's because this is the actor they could get without a conflict that particular week? Like, there's just so many of these questions that you wonder about. I'm guessing you guys were not big fans of these episodes.
It's
No.
complicated.
Yeah. They definitely weren't my favorite this season, but we've had significantly worse episodes.
Yeah.
I see all the callbacks. So like the tanks, I guess, that they used to put the beast to sleep, that have like the radio antenna cannons. That's, to me, like, that's definitely a callback to the Gojira movies, which often feature these types of weapons, because you have to have electric cannon shooting things instead of just like regular tanks, I guess. It adds like a sci-fi element to it, like even these like slightly futuristic weapons can't defeat this monster.
Right.
And so I think that was a deliberate reference to that canon. But it's just, I don't know, it's not interesting in the same way that those movies ultimately aren't interesting. They're just like fun to watch.
Yeah, I found there was a number of like plot elements in these movies that I found really fascinating in these episodes, but the overall story of like will they or won't they like stop the beast, I think it's hard to kind of build drama around that. Especially because they do the thing that a lot of times I think happens in like monster movies that I always don't like, which is they tell you that the beast is almost entirely invulnerable, and then the way that our heroes beat it doesn't actually seem that interesting or new. Like at one point they say, I think Anakin says that he's discovered that like there's a way to like get under the scales with an energy weapon and thus like stun it if you can just get under the scales. And so I'm imagining, okay, that means you're going to have people like hopping on the back of it, trying to like lift up its scales and fire under it. Instead, it's nope, just fire a bunch of energy weapons at the thing and I guess hope you hit in a way that would not make any sense. So, yeah, I think that didn't work, but I did like some parts of it. And one of the first things I caught on, and what did you guys think of the way the Dougs were handled in this, and sort of their attitude of, we want to kill it. This thing has destroyed us for generations. We thought it was dead. We think this is a existential threat to our society and our people. And the Jedi basically saying like, no, you can't do that. What was your take on how that all played out?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think this is Mace Windu at like peak dickishness. Like the Zilla beasts were like a big life form on this planet, and then were killed out. Or they thought they had killed them all, but clearly there was like one still chilling underground for who knows how long. But yeah, Mace is very like, it's intelligent and we must protect it at all costs. And they're like, we are also intelligent and it's killing us like very effectively. So it's just like a weird, the sort of like myopic approach that Anakin usually has, where it's like, yeah, but this one is my friend, so I don't care how many of the nameless clones, citizens of this planet, whatever, die, because I want to save the one thing that I like.
Yeah. While we were watching it, I mentioned it felt like a very Star Trek morality of like the prime directive applies to whatever we want it to apply to.
Yeah, it felt very colonial to me. I mean, the aspect of like, we, this superpower, have come to your world. We're testing out a weapon that we think doesn't have any consequences on your world. And we have found out that it now will cause a horrific, total damaging thing that you are terrified of consequence on your world. But then we're going to tell you not to try and fix it. Like, it just all seemed very the Dugs seemed like they were played to be sinister in ways that didn't really make sense. Like at one point, when they the Jedi proposed that they take the beast off their planet, and they're like, no, we have to kill it instead. That didn't make any sense. It's off your planet. What do you care anymore at that point?
Yeah.
But yeah, like I kind of felt like the Dugs had a point for a lot of this. Like it just felt very sort of like outsider colonialist. Like, we're going to tell you what to do.
Yeah, and like what gives you the authority? Like, who put you in charge here? And I mean, like, I guess the Jedi do occupy this sort of nebulous. Like, are they in charge of every Republican colony across the whole galaxy? Like, what's the deal?
Right.
Yeah, but it is. I totally agree with what you're saying, Matthew.
It's a missed opportunity in that they used the Dugs in the first place, but then played them kind of like very one note, because previously the one Dug we have encountered in this universe is Sebulba, the pod racer pilot, who is like the big shot and is just like a huge D-bag to Anakin.
Yeah.
So like that's who we met, and we're like, this Dug is terrible. Not all Dugs, but then it turns out like this race is like, and it reminds me of just like the way in Star Trek, like all Klingons care about honor, all Vulcans are logical, like all people of one race have to be the same.
I think you're right, and it's something that they seem to go across the board with. You know, every planet only has one. You know, the species only sort of has one emotional mindset. The planet only has one climate. You know, they're always either the desert planet, the swamp planet, the cold planet, whatever it is. And yeah, you don't get much room for disagreement. And I think, to me, that's especially disappointing because we don't always see that. You know, the race that we originally get introduced to as Guido's people, the Roharans? Rodians.
Rodians.
Rodians, thank you. You know, their people are very different than we met them in A New Hope. But yeah, sometimes they definitely just are like, nope, Dugs, they're kind of the bad ones.
And I think it also plays into the inhumanness of them, because the Dugs walk on their front legs or hands.
Yeah, like their arms are their legs, and then their legs are their arms kind of situation.
So they're very inhumanoid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they look weird. They look not civilized. There's one piece about the Dugs and about the whole way that story is told that I did really like, and I don't know if this was intentional or if they kind of stumbled into social commentary here. But, you know, in the world history, certainly in the United States, but in other cases as well, two things that we often see are, one, the way warfare can become kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of, we need to get more resources in order to fight this war, and so now we're going to fight a war to get more resources, and now we need to keep fighting the war to get those resources. And so, you know, you saw that 100 times with the Americans, you saw that with the Japanese before World War II, you've seen that with, like, Russia. I mean, it's definitely a trend that you see. And so I was really struck by that when they were having Anakin and I think Palpatine say, you know, no, actually, I'm sorry, it was the narrator who specifically says, you know, they need the fuel in order to fuel their armies to keep fighting. So it's now we're fighting so we can keep fighting. And the other thing that also I think often goes hand in parcel, the thing that often goes hand in glove with that is that we wind up making alliances with not great people in order to keep access to their resources, you know? And so throughout the Cold War, the U.S. worked with dictators in places like Indonesia or South America or places like that, where we worked with pretty much fascists because they could give us the resources that we thought we needed for the Cold War. I don't know if that's in any way intentional, but definitely this story brought out both of those things. And I liked that in showing that, like, we're seeing the things that the Republic is doing in order to fight this war that are not really in line with the Republic ideals.
Yeah.
Yep. That's, I don't know. It's interesting. We've been watching The Crown, and
that's a good show.
There are several episodes where a royal goes to some other country, or I guess at that point a colony of the British Empire that has since declared independence, and they give these speeches that are just so cringy about, the savage natives and how we came and we saved them. And it's...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very yikes.
And a lot of the interactions here, I think you're right, remind me of that, of... Like, we're just going to take advantage of these people because we really need this fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We need the resource that they give us, whether it's rubber or oil or whatever it is.
Missed opportunity with this episode, I thought. The planet Malastare is mentioned previously in this season as the planet where Admiral Yularen was defeated by Admiral Trench. That was like their previous encounter. So like having Yularen come and help them pick up the Zillo Beast at the end and just kind of mentioning like, I haven't been back here since I lost a trench or whatever.
Yeah.
Some kind of reference, just tie-ins like that. Like when you have this rich universe and these planets and places, just using them in that way, I think is nice for callbacks and to tie things together.
Well, especially because I thought the aliens that have 3 eyes on eye stalks, who we first met in A New Hope and who we then saw in the Clone War movies, because I think they're the ones who actually second the motion for the investigation into the charges against the Trade Federation. Why I remember that particular detail, I have no idea. But I feel like that they specifically say like, we'll now hear from the representative from Malastare. And am I wrong there? Am I getting my planets mixed up?
I don't know.
I'm frantically looking this up because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Like when you say 3 eyes on eye stalks, it makes me think of the Ithorians, I think is what they're called. But I thought
the Ithorians were the hammerhead ones.
Oh, yeah, okay. So they're similar, but you're right. I think they are different.
Yeah,
okay.
we're right now getting a lot of, and I like more listener feedback. I'm sure we have a lot of people currently yelling at their podcast playing devices.
Look, I didn't have this figurine.
The Gran? Okay. Yeah, when you said eye stalks, I was picturing more like the one monster from Monsters, Inc. who's got the shifty eyes. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
Okay, and it does say
from
they're from the
Malastare?
planets Kinyan and Malastare.
Interesting. Yeah, Congress of Malastare. Malastare.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of this multiple races on the same planet deal.
And I mean, I kind of like that. So like earlier we were just
Yeah.
talking about how like a lot of the planets have like the samey environments, and like we get the forest moon of Endor, and I can believe that a moon has like one environment, sure. But yeah, having like entire planets, I guess like maybe Earth is pretty unusual in that we've got such different climates in different places, but when they get it right, I really like it. Like we were talking about Rebels a little while ago, and there's they go at some point in Rebels they go to Kessel, and you get to see like very different environments on Kessel, which I think is really cool. And also even like if we just think of the Twi'lek people, they come in like a whole variety of different like skin colors, eye colors, different like
different accents.
Yeah,
different
exactly. And some of that
what
may
do you
be
mean?
like actor differentiation, but some of it could be like different regions, right? So I think it adds another layer to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you do get a planet where it's like the entire species all looks the same and all acts exactly one way, it's a little frustrating. Yeah.
So the last thing I wanted to ask about this plot line was, what do you think about Palpatine's actions in this? It is, I mean, obviously, like he's looking for power, he's looking to cause more trouble, but he comes very close, it seems, to being killed, and he certainly seems like he did not for a minute think that this beast was going to get loose. Was this all? I mean, but so much of this has always been that everything is planned out, everything is going as I have foreseen it, etc. Do we think that this is Palp's overstepping a bit and making a mistake, or is this just one more part of his plan?
Well, I'm trying to hold my suspension of disbelief as much as I can in regards to what all Palpatine has orchestrated, but like everything. I don't like, how did he know that this beast was there and that the weapon they're testing, which basically turns off droids, is going to wake it up? Mm-hmm. So like, if you didn't know the beast was there, it would have been like some quick thinking of like, oh, cool, it's impenetrable. Let's bring it back to Coruscant so I can make armor. This will be handy. And yeah, not the like 30-year long game that he's used to.
Right.
So I could see him maybe making some missteps there.
Yeah, I like the idea that he made a misstep here. That maybe he was a little bit overly confident in his ability to sort of control everything.
I wish he had used his Force abilities to save himself. And kind of like, oh, like, did anyone see?
Ooh, that would have been good.
That would have been
I
so cool.
I thought
yeah.
that's what was going to happen.
I think that would have been great because, you know, in the movies at least, there's the idea that there might be some people in the audience, and I never thought this was true, but I've heard there were some who, because they had very little contact with the original movies, didn't honestly realize that Palpatine was Darth Sidious until some point in the second or third movies. And so I get why in the movies they wouldn't want to show it, but by the time the show has come out, the third movie's always come and gone. We in the audience know that Palpatine is Darth Sidious. So yeah, it would have been great to watch him like secretly have to use his Force powers and then be like, oh shit, did I get caught? No, okay, we're good.
Well, and even like in the show, they're not really hiding the fact that Palpatine is Sidious that well. Like, they don't explicitly come out and say it, at least not in these first two seasons, but I mean, it's kind of like an open secret, so having him use Force powers without, again, explicitly saying, he's Darth Sidious, would have been fine, and just like a nice little, like, nod and like, yeah, hint in that direction.
I think there are, like, later on in the series, there are scenes where he just calls up Dooku from the Chancellor's office and just, like, code switches his voice.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
Well, is his voice even different? Doesn't he just, like, put on a hoodie? Isn't that his...
He goes lower.
He's a little
when
gravelier?
He's Sidious. Okay. Yeah. He's much, like, as Palpatine, he's much a higher tone, more regal, and then as Sidious, he, like, puts on his...
I'm evil now.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, it's the scene from Batman the Animated Series where he's like in the Batman suit, but he gets a call from Commissioner Gordon for Bruce Wayne or something like that, and he like changes. So he's like talking in the Bruce Wayne voice as Batman. It's just, it's cool.
It's good.
Yeah, no, I liked moments like that. It would have been nice to see some of that. All right. Anything more on Le Beast de Zillo, or can we move on to the Boba arc?
Yeah, let's move on to the Boba arc.
I just want to say, what? Why would they be like, I want you to clone the beast and then never come back to it? It's
super weird.
I think it's one more of these situations that we see of, you know, and part of this I think is the writing itself, but part of it's also when it was written. We are now so used to the idea that when someone starts writing episode 1, they've already plotted out at least the first season, if not the whole arc. When this was being written, it was pretty common for TV shows to have no idea what was going to happen next season. And I think this is I think the most glaring, but there's probably a couple of these things where they kind of left themselves a story hook with the idea of maybe we'll go back and write that at some point. And sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. And yeah, it's kind of annoying because it would have been nice to see where they went with it. Yeah. But also like where would you go with it story-wise? Because at the end of the day, doesn't it just become another big monster fight?
Yeah, and if you do have, like, the cloning to get that technology, like, clearly Sidious doesn't have that technology, right? Because we would have seen it in A New Hope and onward. So it's like, yeah. I mean, even just like, oh yeah, remember when we tried to clone that Zilla Beast? That didn't work. Moving on. I don't know, but they have cloning technology. It's weird. It's a weird setup that leaves you in this like cliffhangery place of like, oh, he's gonna clone it, but then nothing happens.
We've mentioned before, especially Riki, you've brought up the Timothy Zahn books, which were some of like I think the first of the novels printed, certainly of the ones printed after Return of the Jedi came out.
No, I think the Courtship of Princess Leia might have been first.
Oh, maybe. Hey, I'm thinking of the Heir to the Empire trilogy, which maybe you're right wasn't first, but certainly was out there. And one of the things that it postulated was that, and this was granted when the Clone Wars was very different, but that clones couldn't really function effectively unless they had a Jedi who was involved in their cloning process, because to basically like give them like sort of the essence of life, or there's something about like the mental makeup of clones that doesn't quite work unless you have their because they're clones, their connection to the Force isn't quite. I don't remember the exact details, but like
the clones in the Legends are much more unstable, and the concept of the Clone Wars in that setting is more about fighting against the clones, I believe. Like the clones and the clone masters, I believe they're called, kind of go crazy and like fight against the galaxy.
Yeah, which is sort of certainly what I took from the original movies. But the idea, the point here being that they established in those books at least that cloning comes at a great cost, and cloning is a difficult thing, and that's why most people haven't done cloning since then. And you're right; it's kind of a frustration of this is. There's really no reason why people don't clone anymore. So yeah, that part's definitely unfortunate. Anyway, so let's move on to the Tale of Boba Fett. So, and it's a 3-part arc. It starts with Death Trap, in which we start out by getting, first of all, Mace and Anakin are on vacation, which is going to involve training young kids, which does not sound like much of a vacation to me, but fair enough. And so we start out with a bunch of clones, young clones, like they're like 10, 11, 12, who are all sort of like being put through their paces, and this is kind of like a field trip as part of their training, as far as I can tell. And one of them seems like he's super well trained, but he's also a little bit rebellious, and we find out halfway through the episode that this is actually Boba Fett, the son of Jango Fett, who watched his father have his head cut off by Mace Windu. So he infiltrates the Republic cruiser, and he joins a group of clones, and he has the intention of assassinating Mace Windu for killing his father, Jango Fett. And then the second episode in it is called R2 Come Home, which is one of the most red herrings of a name. And it's Anakin Skywalker and Mace Windu are trapped in the crumbling ruins of a crashed ship while looking for survivors. This is all because of Boba Fett's like attempt to take over. We find out he's working with other bounty hunters, and they're looking for the survivors. And only R2 can get a message out to save them. If he can elude vicious Gundarks, and worse yet, a crew of determined bounty hunters led by Boba Fett and Aura Singh. And then we get to the third episode, which is Lethal Trackdown. While Anakin and Mace Windu recover from their injuries, Plo Koon and Ahsoka track down Boba Fett from the underworld of Coruscant to the desert planet of Florum. Boba's revenge scheme finally leads to a climactic battle, and the life of a Republic admiral hangs in the balance. So, we had quite a little arc here. What'd you think of the return of Baby Fett?
It's a little weird. I've always felt that the Boba Fett prequel arc was strange, and I guess it's because it was never supposed to be a thing until it became a thing. Like, Boba Fett was just a throwaway character, and then became one of the most popular characters with 4 lines across 2 movies.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it's in part, like, I think his toy was, like, one of the ones that sold the most or something like that. Like, it was a very...
Oh, yeah, well, it had a spring-loaded rocket that shot out.
Yes, that sounds right.
But didn't that not... It was supposed to have a spring-loaded rocket that shot out, but the actual ones that went out for production didn't, because the rocket was so small that it was like a choking hazard. Oh, maybe. So, like, the spring-loaded ones are only for prototypes.
That's the rare one.
Yeah,
the collector's item.
So the ones that actually went out, like, didn't have this rocket launcher, but it was something that was supposed to be available for Christmas, and then people... Yeah. You bought a voucher instead of buying the toys because the toys weren't ready fast enough.
Yes. We watched the toys that made us.
We watched a documentary about this. But yeah, Boba Fett was shockingly popular for, like you said, 4 lines of dialogue. I remember we were in some store that had Star Wars merch, and there was a Boba Fett toy, and it advertised, like, with 7 sounds. And we were just like, what? This dude has 4 lines. So it was 4 lines and then 3, like, blaster noises. Yeah. His sound effects.
And I think Aura Singh is actually, and this may be intentional, is kind of the same thing, isn't she? She appeared, she, like, appeared with no lines in Phantom Menace and then all of a sudden took off as a fan favorite.
She's standing like on a ridge during the pod race, like holding her tall rifle. Doesn't say anything, it's just standing there. The Phantom Menace card game that came out after the movie, she was like super powerful in that. And there's like the backstory explained on the card. It's like she's the most fearsome bounty hunter in the galaxy. So people are like, "Oh my god, she's the Boba Fett of the prequels." And nothing happened with her in the movies.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Like both of these characters occupy the same space of mythical bounty hunter that we know little about. So now we have to find out more about Boba Fett and how he becomes the most fearsome bounty hunter.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Which it does feel to me like he took kind of a step backwards, though, because in the second movie, the only movie we see him in, his father is trying to kill Obi-Wan, and Boba is quite happily a little sociopath, happily like cheering on his father, like, "You go get him, Dad!" And so, but in this one, he clearly is still in that, like, I haven't quite become fully evil yet. He's not willing to kill a prisoner. Singh has to like push him somewhat, and like there's a moment where he almost like turns back to the good because he like maybe like did that all just strike you as wrong? I sort of felt like this ship has sailed with this character. We have seen this character be worse than this, and that was before he watched his father get his head chopped off.
Well, I think this is the power of friendship, Matthew. Because like he was a psychopath, as you say. But then, like, now he's in with all these young clones who, even though he's not a clone, he looks a lot like these clones of his dad when his dad was young, right? And they're doing their, like, group bonding activities. As you say, they've gone on a field trip together. He's learned to work as a team. So I think, like, that, like, I can reasonably believe that might have softened him a bit, and maybe he doesn't want to blow up his new friends.
Sure. There's also where he has to like knock out a clone trooper to take his rifle and his radio or something like that.
Right.
And the trooper is like, "What are you doing? We're brothers." And he stuns him, but he says some stuff like, "I'm not your brother," but also is conflicted because this man looks like his father.
Right. And he does stun him. He doesn't, and he says something like, "Don't." There's some element of like, "Don't worry, I'm not going to kill you," and then he stuns him.
Well, also that reminds me, that scene takes place in like the hyperdrive chamber. None of these hyperdrive chambers on ships have handrails. It always bothers me. Yeah. So like there's these walkways, and it goes back to Obi-Wan on the Death Star, right? When he's trying to turn off the tractor beam. There's no handrails, and if you fall off the walkway, it's like 100 feet down to who knows what.
Yeah, and it's like maybe
it's
a
very
meter wide,
dangerous.
like a meter wide walkway.
I don't understand like how the safety standards on these ships that allow this.
Listen, both the Republic and the Empire, OSHA is really bad.
Yeah.
I can definitely understand those concerns, to be sure.
It's like the scene in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek when the artificial gravity goes out and like Kirk and Chekhov are like spinning around as the ship like turns over and over, and it's just like very dangerous. It's like, this is a spaceship. Artificial gravity might go out. Maybe the ship should not be designed in a way when it does, like you just fall to your doom.
You've seen the movie, okay, I can't remember the name of it now. Let me try that again. You've seen the movie Galaxy Quest, right?
No.
I haven't. No.
Okay, you guys need to see it. Galaxy Quest is the most loving parody send-up of Star Trek that I could ever imagine. Especially because it is like constantly making fun of, but also the heroes wind up being the Star Trek fandom. It is brilliant. I definitely recommend it to anyone who likes Star Trek. But one of the best parts of it is that there's a scene where basically like the characters are talking about how there's like that the design of the ship makes absolutely no sense. That it's just done to like build tension and drama as you're trying to move through difficult parts of the ship in ways that just for basic ship design make no sense whatsoever.
Oh yeah.
Which do you think is a bigger pet peeve of mine, Sarah? The no handrails in the hyperdrive chamber, or the most sensitive part of the ship, the bridge, being on top with windows.
Jeez.
She hears me complain about these things every time they come up.
Constantly. Almost as much as I complain about the 3D-ness of space not being recognized. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the no handrails on the bridge makes significantly less sense than the bridge on top of the ship, because the bridge on top of the ship is like, we're borrowing architecture and design from water ships.
Right.
They had to see
a better word than
they
that.
had to see over the waves.
Yeah.
That's why the bridge is on the top.
And like, we'll put some windows up there, because I don't know, maybe you'll see some cool planets and stuff.
Just in
Who
case the
knows?
cameras go out.
Yeah, but I mean, especially like going back to Star Trek, having the bridge be on like the piece that detaches, and then having the battle bridge be like a separate location you have to get to is really dumb. Just make your bridge the battle bridge. The end. But yeah, I think like the no handrails is just mind-bogglingly bad. Like, how many people fall to their death there? It's
just like an engineer trips and like, oh,
right, and you can't even have like two people walking across this thing at the same time. It's really weird. Same with the like all the like ventilation tubes being like huge.
Big enough to crawl through.
Yeah. I don't even get that it's plot device. I don't even know. Like, is the no handrails plot device? Just put in like a single railing, and then someone can easily flip over top of it. But like,
I think it's all because there were no handrails in A New Hope.
So we have to establish the no handrails canon.
That's what they look like. Well,
I think there's definitely things like that where they established New Hope, and that might in part because like, they didn't have the imagination, or they didn't have the budget, or I mean, one thing I'm always fascinated by is how with any science fiction, you're always limited by what people at the time thought would be possible. So, for example, like in the original Star Trek, they thought that you'd have supercomputers that could control planets and you could talk to and would have personalities, but their screens would still be monochromatic. Because that's all that people knew at the time. VGA had not been invented yet.
This actually reminds me, the Battlestar Galactica reboot TV series started off as just like a movie. Right. It was the pilot, and when they were filming that, they had like paper, and they cut it hexagonally, or like maybe octagon. Like they cut the corners off, so that instead of like corners on the piece of paper, they were like flat edges.
It's like a stretched out octagon.
Yeah. And they just did it like to be stylistic and like, oh, like it looks cool. And then every time they showed like paper or books, they had to cut it in the same way. They're like, why did we do this?
It's also so like silly. Like, why would you ever make paper like that? I worked at a comic book store for quite a while, and we sold the Battlestar Galactica like notepads that had the corners cut off. It's
God,
silly. But yeah.
Anyway, let's pull us back a little bit from Tangent Land here.
What?
I had more stuff to talk about in Tangent Land.
Boba Fett, where?
Great quote. Yeah, but about these episodes.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we're 3 episodes away from the end of season 2, Rise of the Bounty Hunters, and we see a bounty hunter rising. Like they snuck that in. I told you there were
7 episodes. There's the 3 Cad Bane episodes.
Sure, at the very beginning.
The literal episode Bounty Hunters, where they defend the village. And then the 3 Boba Fett episodes.
Yep. And I did like that we get Hondo here. And then Hondo again. It is to me a very Hondo episode because they show up and it seems like Hondo is working for the Bounty Hunters. And at first I'm like, really? Would you be? But then it becomes very clear that no, they just showed up. And Hondo he thinks this is all a bridge too far. Not because he has some moral compunction against it, just because he's not quite stupid enough to piss off the Jedi this much. And so I like that when the Jedi show up, he's like, nope, not my circus, not my monkeys. They just showed up. I'm not part of this. I'll help you. Like,
yeah, well, like instantaneously, right?
He's not into it because there's no profit, right? That's like the kind of Ferengi aspect of him.
Yeah, this is
what's the point of this? Like revenge.
This is for justice and revenge, and for the other bounty hunters to show off.
Yeah.
I mean, they think they're going to get a ton of money from Count Dooku, but that's about all.
Yeah. Well, he's already dealt with Dooku, so he knows he's not getting paid.
Which, actually, that's a really good point. It does bring me to, I wouldn't even say my other complaint about the series of episodes, because this is such a common trope in these kind of stories, even though I find it so dumb. If someone were to just randomly, like, kill my father, I'd be super mad at that person.
Mm-hmm.
If someone were to, like, you know, break into his house or be, like, think he had done a terrible... Like, if he, like, killed my father for, like, that kind of reason, I don't know if I'm a revenge type guy, but I'd certainly be thinking about it. If my father's a warrior, and I'm proud of the fact that my father's a warrior, and I watch my father in battle kill numerous people, and then get killed by another warrior, I don't see where that leads to a revenge quest, even though that becomes such a trope in these movies and TV shows. But it's never quite worked for me. It's sort of like, you know, like, Mace didn't decide, like... Say again? Yeah, that's what he signed up for.
That's what he signed up for, yeah.
Mace didn't decide he hated Jango Fett. He fought him fair and square, and he killed him.
I think it's more kind of a matter of familial honor. Because so the Mandalorians are supposed to be renowned as Jedi killers. Right? At least in the canon, like, they had wars in the past. And a lot of this armor and the weaponry of the armor is designed to counteract Jedi. Yep. So, as kind of a scion of that, like, I think Jango Fett had a lot of pride. And, you know, he kind of fights Obi-Wan to a standstill / defeats him. You know, doesn't kill him. But then is killed by Mace. So there's this sense of, like, oh, like, he was supposed to be the best. He was supposed to be the Jedi killer. And he lost to one. So I think...
the chosen one.
Yeah, I think part of it is, yeah, you killed my dad, but part of it is, like, restoring Jango's honor. And
that would make sense if we'd gotten some of that in the actual canon.
I'm sure there's a book.
Yeah. Like, I kind of know that. I know you know it better than I, and Jonah Kelman probably can, you know rings around both of us in terms of our knowledge. And you're right, that version of it makes total sense. I just wish we'd gotten... He just had to say one line of, my father died a proud Mandalorian, and the way is for me to avenge his death. Anything like that.
Not just like, I'm mad at you for killing my dad.
Speaking of one lines, so at the end of this, Boba loses, and he's captured, and he's, like, taken away to prison. And on his way there, he runs into Mace. And he, like, apologizes to Mace. He's like, I'll never forgive you, but I see now that, like, what I was doing was wrong. Right? So he, like, admits fault, says, I'm still mad at you because you killed my dad. And then Mace just, like, wrecks him.
Yeah. Mace is a huge, huge jerk.
And I felt like that was a moment where you could have mended this and prevented him from rising to become Boba Fett.
But I think that's the problem, right? Like,
that Mace is an ass?
That Mace is an ass, but also, like, he does rise to become Boba Fett. So you can't really write something in that's going to prevent that, right? To have Mace just be, like, a huge dickbag to him is kind of like, okay, and now we see why Boba...
But he still goes to prison. So you could still have the... Well, like, prison is where you learn how to become a criminal.
Sure.
Because that's the thing is, like, the Boba Fett we see as an adult is not someone who hates the Jedi. Like, I don't see him as, like, driven by passion and emotion. He's 100% just a mercenary.
Yeah,
like,
he's driven by
and
money.
there's actually, I think there's some tales of Boba Fett having a morality. Like, he's supposed to be, like, one of the more moral bounty hunters in some storylines, I think.
Right. Now, what's interesting, though, on all this, because there's another quote I want to talk about because I think certainly Mace is a huge dick, but I think it kind of helped. I like that plot line because I think it helps to show, like, just how, fucked up Mace. I think it goes to show just how screwed up Mace and the Jedi are. Like, they're so lost in their hubris and their pride. But there's also a line, and I want to talk more about that in a second, but there's a line where Hondo says, "Tell the Jedi what he wants to know, Boba." And Boba Fett is shouting, "Why should I help anybody? I've got no one." And Hondo says, "It's the honorable thing to do. It's what your father would have wanted." What?
Oh, yeah.
Like, again, if that's the Mandalorian honor thing, sure, but we have had no indication of that whatsoever.
It didn't make much sense, but I thought it made sense for Hondo to play him that way.
That's fair.
It seemed very Hondo.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, do we even know that Hondo knew Jango Fett?
It probably did.
Probably.
Hondo
knows everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. we have to mention that Hondo and Aurra Singh were a couple.
Oh my gosh, yes, what?
Yeah, for reasons I don't...
That is mentioned.
Yeah.
And that's like the prequel we need to this.
Yeah.
Well, because she, like, as we have found, it's okay if you're a good person, if you're on the good guy's side, a good woman. But if you are a female antagonist, no matter how badass you are, your sexuality has to be part of... You cannot be a female antagonist in this world without being a vamp. Like, that's just... There has to be a little bit of femme fatale, and it's just obnoxious that they keep going back to that.
I didn't even think it was, like, sexy Aurra Singh, though. It was just, like, a weird, like, oh, my ex. And you're, like a strange, almost sitcom-y plotline that's just sort of thrown in there. And there's not really any payoff for it. I think it's more, though, that to run into each other.
I think it's more, though, that, like, she's been very flirtatious in other scenes. And so... And now we just further establish, like, yes, she's a person with a sexuality and who has relationships and who dates. You know, it's just kind of like further underlining that idea.
Yeah. Which, I mean, like, dating Hondo in and of itself isn't necessarily bad in any way, shape, or form, right? Like, yeah. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
I'm just saying I think that's why... You're asking why did they have to throw it in? I think that's why they did.
Just to point it out, yeah.
The other really dumb line I wanted to comment on, not even dumb actually, because I think is actually very good in terms of the, like, showing just how much the Jedi are falling. Boba Fett is pointing a blaster at Plo Koon, and he's explaining why he wants to do what he wants to do, and he says, "I'm not a murderer, but I want justice." And Plo Koon, showing the humbleness and the humility and the understanding of their position that the Jedi show, says, "We are justice."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I roll.
Yeah.
I didn't eye roll. I got chills. Like, to me, I was like, oh yeah, okay. This is why the Jedi fall. This is the hypocrisy that Anakin sees. You thought it was kind of just silly and over the top.
Well, it seemed very like, I am the knight, right? Like they're. But I mean, I get what you're saying in that. Batman. Boba Fett should become Batman? How many people have you said should become Batman today?
I don't know.
A couple. Anyway.
We need more Batman.
We're watching The Crown. He thinks Prince Philip should be Batman. Anyway. Yeah, it's a very cringy line. I totally get what you're saying. I didn't think of that at the time. That, like... Because it is so cringy. And Anakin seeing the cringiness of it, right? Is kind of a, like... Well, I mean, yeah, obviously Plo Koon believes that. Mm-hmm. But it's still, like, gross. But then Anakin can see that he believes it, and it's gross, and it aids in his conscious uncoupling from the Jedi.
Right. Yeah.
Speaking of Plo Koon's hypocrisy.
Oh my gosh.
He and Ahsoka start off episode 3 of this arc going to the underworld of Coruscant. Which is actually interesting, because Ahsoka ends up there later.
Right.
In the series.
Spoilers.
But they go to a bunch of bars. Bunch of seedy bars, and then like the last one, the previous ones happen off screen, and then the last one they go to, Plo Koon like gives Ahsoka a tip. He's like, "You should be more subtle, young one."
Yeah,
and then he walks in and plops his lightsaber on the bar and is like, "I'm looking for information."
Yeah,
it's like that's not subtle at all.
That's the exact.
You just walked into like the bar and like flashed your badge.
Yeah,
doesn't he end up like getting in a fight with someone too?
Because no, she does.
She does, and then he has to like back her up / save her. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is often shown as like not one of the brightest bulbs in the Jedi cabinet. To mix 5 different metaphors in one sentence.
He's an interesting character. Like I like him as a mentor to Ahsoka, but I don't. He does not seem like an effective Jedi. I don't know.
Yeah, just kind of like not amazing. Definitely not like a Yoda or even a Mace Windu. He's very average as far as Jedi Masters go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is this intentional though? Is this part of the Jedi are out of touch thing, Matthew? Is him just walking into a bar and plopping his lightsaber and thinking that that's subtle?
I don't know. You know, I with so much of this, I don't know how much I'm headcanoning and how much the writers were were they brilliant or did they accidentally stumble into plot? I just have no idea. I think We Are Justice is an intentional line.
Sure.
I think they have to realize what they're doing with that. I think the don't be be subtle thing and then being so very unsubtle. I think that's probably intentional by the writers. But yeah, I really want to read the book of like behind the scenes, the making of the Clone Wars, because there are just so many fascinating questions about how this all happened and like what the debates in the writers' room would have been and all that stuff that I really want to know more about.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about it some more, and maybe he's telling Ahsoka to be subtle and then drawing the attention to himself, so that Ahsoka in the background can just like listen in and get some info. I don't know.
That could be it.
I'm just like thinking about this one scene too much.
Yeah, actually, the more I think of it, the more I think actually that might be it. That he tells her to be subtle, and that he kind of makes it easier by being like, I will get all the attention on me.
Yeah, or even that like he's sort of talking about subtlety in a different tack than what he's doing, right? Like, he's telling her basically like, go connect with the Force and like try and listen in on some conversation, and he in his mind is maybe doing something completely different, which is just like he's gonna go talk to this barkeeper and show his badge because he's a Jedi and people are gonna respect him because he's the cops, and that's gonna hold some swagger, and he's out of touch, as you mentioned, Riki. But yeah, it was a very odd moment, but yeah, definitely not as deliberate feeling as the I am justice line.
Yeah, I think it's very true. Just kind of looking over the summaries to see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about.
Well, we talked kind of around it, but the middle episode was completely unnecessary, in my opinion.
But I mean, it did do another further deeper dive into Mace Windu is a total dickwad.
Yes, I think that is true.
Which was, I mean, something, I guess, right? But I mean, like, we set it up in the Zillow Beast episodes. We got a little bit of it in Death Trap, which is the first episode in this arc. So yeah, I don't think we really needed even more Mace Windu's a jerk. Because that's really all that episode served to deal with.
He and Anakin spend most of this episode trapped under like a sheet of metal on the derelict starship, on the crashed starship. And he's just like spouting off.
Yeah, and the bounty hunters are trying to find them / escape this.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a Titanic episode.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing strikes me as wrong, especially because, we have seen that Mace Windu is supposed to be a Jedi, like basically on the level of Master Yoda in some ways. Yoda can lift starships out of swamps.
Yeah.
Why can Mace Windu not move a couple of pieces of metal? Like it's a problem you often get in a show where you create this great power and then write a plot that the great power would erase, and so you have to just sort of either ignore it or science away or hand wave away for the great power to not work anymore. Yeah.
I think the hand wave is like they try, but it's too dangerous. Like, and too much other stuff would fall.
Well, and also,
but then how do the clones save them at the end?
And also, Yoda, when Yoda's lifting ships out of swamps, like, this is several years in the future, and Yoda goes through his own sort of like transformation arc where he does some stuff to amplify his powers. So I could see it as like even Yoda is maybe not at ship lifting levels of force use quite yet. So that's maybe why Mace can't do it either.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and it's so the title I think really sets the tone for this episode is weird and kind of useless. Like, R2 Come Home has almost no bearing on what actually happens in this episode.
Oh, I remember. So when I'm trying to plot out our discussions, and I look to see like what arcs there are, I hadn't seen the show in like 6 years, so I didn't remember details. And I looked and I saw, okay, there's an episode about Boba Fett, and then there's an episode about R2. Like, I forgot that this was all one arc because I saw that name and it was like, okay, that's some weird droid episode that pops up every now and then.
And I guess, why wouldn't it even be R2 go home? Because you're, like, sending him away with the information to go help it. Yeah.
I feel like it's one of those things that... again, I'm curious what the contracts are, and what are the specifications? And like, did someone, maybe it was Lucas, or maybe it was, in contracts or something, but it says like Mace Windu has to appear in this many episodes, because I mean, we have 2 different plot arcs in which Mace Windu features prominently for not necessarily a needed reason. And I feel like, once or twice a season, we're supposed to have an episode that's all about R2 looking plucky and cute.
Sure.
Because that's what kids want, I guess, or that's what their parents will want, because it connects it to them. It just seems such a like check off the boxes kind of episode.
But this isn't even like R2 doesn't even get to do much in this episode. Like, he's been even just as a side character in some of the other episodes, much pluckier and much cuter. Yeah, it's just weird. I
thought he did a lot. He, like, in the beginning part, he defends the Jedi from the bounty hunters. He like diehards them in the ship
by like setting up distractions and like blowing up different pathways.
Yeah.
And at first they think it's just the ship is crumbling around it, and then they realize they're actually being sabotaged.
Yeah.
But Die Hard, or maybe more like Home Alone.
Home Alone. R2's definitely Home
like
Alone.
that.
Maybe that's why.
That's what it could have been.
It out.
That's what it could have been. But yeah, I agree with you. I also thought all this stuff about the Scottish admiral who wants to go down with his ship for no discernible reason was also, it was just eye-rolly.
It was also super weird, because like, I get the idea of like being the last one off your ship. That makes sense, right? Don't leave your ship until all your crew are gone. Cool. But all his crew is gone. Why do you just want to die? That makes no sense.
Yeah. It's also like the idea of the captain, or in this case the admiral, like going down with the ship is supposed to be like an in combat thing.
Right.
Like someone should stay on to like keep firing the last guns and make sure that the ship actually gets scuttled, so that it doesn't get captured. Yeah,
it's a scuttle thing. It's the, you should be on the last lifeboat. You shouldn't go ahead of anybody else. And sometimes there's sort of a sense of like, it's your responsibility, and sometimes that's tied into like warrior culture, or like you're supposed to die with honor, that kind of thing. But the Republic don't have that. Like, where does that come from?
And it's also like not even
it's
war,
gonna,
right?
Yeah,
like
it's gonna crash. Your ship has been sabotaged. It's gonna crash.
There's no conceivable reason for you to just die with it, and it's just taking away Republic resources for you to do so.
Anyway, we do like this show, and we're going to keep liking the show as we get into later seasons.
No. I like the first and the third Boba episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just because we pick away at maybe like weird little intricacies of specific scenes doesn't mean that we don't love the show.
Yeah.
Right? I think being able to find some incongruities or some things that don't quite make sense maybe shows how much we do love it, that we care enough to notice these ridiculous, minute things.
Agreed. I think in going forward, I want to make sure if we can at least talk somewhat about the things we like as well, because I think I have heard from a couple listeners who are like, "Why are you doing the Clone Wars if you all don't like it so much?" So, and I think it's true, and that's why I talked about some of the things that I think were there were. I think we all talked about some really good points in these episodes. But there's definitely some weak writing in these in this last arc.
Gosh, all Hondo. I would watch on Hondo
the
series.
Hondo spin-off.
Yeah. All Hondo all the time. Hondo and R2, just like pound around in space.
So like on the subject of do we like this show? We talked about season 1 was tough to get through, and then season 2 is an improvement on season 1. But even now, like watching it again, I can recognize that it's still a step behind. Like I think season 3 to 5 is the real meat of this series, where it gets good, the plot like connects a lot more, and we get some ongoing storylines and some reintroduction or introduction of characters that are very compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I also really like season 7, which I know you've done a podcast about as well. But yeah, I agree. Like, especially coming back to season 2, I think when watching it through the first time, it was definitely a situation where I was just so happy that it was better than season 1. I didn't necessarily notice.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there was anything that it could be worse than, I suppose. But yeah, seasons 3, 4, and 5. Season 6 is weird because, if I recall correctly, Clone Wars got canceled kind of in the middle of it, so they sort of tacked on a weird quick conclusion that doesn't make a ton of sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that didn't quite work for the last season.
Yeah, but
especially I think season 4 into 5, we just watched constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
during that part.
I think you're right. I think my memory of season 2 was that it was phenomenal because it was so much better than season 1.
Yeah.
And now looking back on it, I still think there's some very good points. I think we're now starting to get into some real depth. It still has some room to grow, and I think we're talking about a lot of the bad points. And these last 5 episodes, I think, were not high points necessarily. But yeah, I think that there's overall, I think we're going to kind of talk about the season. I feel like it makes some really good. It puts some really good ideas out there. It does some interesting world building. It has some really good episodes and some pretty bad ones. The bounty hunters do not rise quite as much as we might have liked, given the title. But, overall, in the right direction. And I think you're right. 3 through 5 and then 7 are really where this show hits its stride.
Yeah. And I'm down with talking more about the positives. I think it's like a little tougher because it's maybe less interesting conversation and just be like, I liked this. The end. At least I find it easier to talk about the things I don't like and the ways I could see improvement instead of just like what's cool and what I like. But I think making a conscious effort to do that going forward is something I'm more than willing to do.
And I think we can make it not just like, oh, hey, here's what we liked, but more like, what's the commentary involved? Like, what are the things that it mentions, or what particularly made things good and stuff like that, Because I think it's to me at least a big part of what I like is when the show really is doing world building, and when it's either telling us more about the overall story or telling us more about the Jedi or telling us, helping to better inform. Because certainly I walk away thinking that the Clone War movies and the overall Jedi story makes much more sense to me because of these movies.
Yeah, and I totally get what people are saying. Like, way back when we first started doing this arc of the podcast, I think we mentioned, like, people would always tell us, oh, it makes the prequels so much better. And I kind of get it, and I do kind of want to watch the prequels, and I feel like maybe I'm just a sucker for punishment. I know...
I'm shaking my head.
I know you just watched them again, Matthew, and did a few episodes on them, but, like, it is doing that. It's getting me re-engaged in what was the series of movies that I genuinely hated. So
yeah, I wound up. We just recorded the 100th episode of Superhero Ethics, and we talked about who are some of our favorite villains. And because a number of the other ones that are high top of my list had gotten mentioned, I mentioned one who's maybe not my top 2 or 3, but has become one of my favorite villains where I somewhat agree with him. And it's Clone Wars Anakin Skywalker. I hate him in the movies, and he's quite bad in some of the show. But I think the show does such a more interesting job showing his slow decline and fall, and you can sort of understand when he's surrounded by people like Plo Koon saying "We are justice," and people like Mace saying this is how we should treat people. You start to understand why he thinks Palpatine might have a case.
And Palpatine always supporting him and being a nice guy to him, and everyone else being like, don't show attachment. Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree.
Him then jumping 10 minutes later to, so let's go kill children. Maybe, but that's again where the movies get in. Anyway, I think it's probably a good point to wrap up. Any other kind of last comments on these before we say goodnight?
No, I'm ready for season 3.
Are we gonna, I don't know, recap the season or, favorite part of the season overall?
Yeah, I think we've been talking about the season there, but yeah, what would you say your favorite part of the season was?
Oh my goodness. I'm going to say Cat and Mouse just because Trench is my fave. Maybe? I don't even know. I like the Mandalore arc. Riki, what do you... I'm looking up the list of the episodes here.
For me, it was definitely the Mandalore arc.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I love Hondo, and Cad Bane is a very compelling adversary, I think Satine was the best character that we get in this season, outside the main characters. And the way that she plays off of Obi-Wan and the suggestions about their past and the connections that they still have now, it was just very well written and well acted, I thought, by those people. And, we're going to get more of that in the future, and it sets it up very well.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. I think the Mandalore plot's probably my favorite. especially for Obi-Wan, just because I feel like Obi-Wan's relationship to Anakin and sort of him clearly knowing what's happening with Anakin and Padme but not getting involved makes to me so much more sense when you realize how close like, to me, you watch Obi-Wan with the Mandalorian Duchess and you think like this is why he has a lot of sympathy for Anakin and why he maybe can't bring himself to force Anakin to do what he had to do. Which is obviously like a terrible decision on Obi-Wan's case, but it makes it tragic in this like beautifully sad way.
And especially Anakin's interactions with Obi-Wan, encouraging him to like, basically like, why don't you just go and hang out with your like this girl you like? What's the big deal? Why is this a problem? Showing how Anakin obviously doesn't see this error of attachment. Yeah. I
also feel like, and maybe I'm misremembering here, but I feel like we got very little Count Dooku this season, didn't we?
Yes.
Probably like 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah, it just felt like a lot of the, there were clones saying Roger, Roger, but a lot of the antagonists weren't clones. I'm sorry, there were droids saying Roger, Roger, but a lot of times the antagonists weren't droids. We don't have any Ventress, which is too bad because I do find her a very fascinating character, even if they take some time to figure out how to best write her. But Count Dooku had always I just never liked him. He just seemed so mustache twirly, especially because I wanted him to be the voice of here's why the Separatists might have a point, and he's so clearly not. So yeah, I think that I think the season really started to develop other storylines beyond just going deeper on the exact things from the Clone Wars, and that's the other thing I think I really liked about it.
Yeah, that sort of villain of the week kind of take on it. I think that's maybe like why I said like Trench might be my favorite character of this season, because I agree. I like that we see different facets of like even the Separatists of other planets fighting in the other planets in the galaxy who either are or are not part of the Republic. And just like what you were talking about earlier, Matthew, with that more in-depth world building. Yeah. And also Trench is so cool.
Yeah, Trench is pretty awesome.
He's also voiced by D. Bradley Baker, which is I don't know if we mentioned that last episode, but another cool fact. Fun Trench fact.
Why are you looking at me?
I don't know, because you don't like him, because he's a spider.
He's a spider.
That's fair. Spider
prejudices.
Yeah, so anything else? Any other sort of high points or low points or thoughts about the season?
There was a little less Cad Bane than I remembered. Mm-hmm. But obviously we get more of Cad Bane, so I think I may have just been projecting that.
Yeah. I agree. I remembered him as being more involved in the season, but I think the season just being called Rise of the Bounty Hunters, I thought that this was the season where he was.
Right. And it's interesting because like Cad Bane, I think I mentioned before that in the X-Wing game, like there's a faction that's just called Scum and Villainy. And I feel like here, like, because like Hondo isn't a bounty hunter, and neither really is Cad Bane. Like they're scum and villainy. Like they're people who kind of do things for their own profit, and they break the law, and they like sometimes hire bounty hunters. But yeah, so the title I feel like was not quite accurate, but I do feel like we got more of the, just in general, we got a lot more of like, what's life like for people who aren't in the midst of the war? You know, whether it's the people on Mandalore, or for the people who are trying to make a buck out on the fringes, or the people who are on other planets. It just felt like we made the world a lot denser and a lot bigger in a way I really liked this season.
Yeah, for sure. Do we want to talk about low points of the series of the season?
Yeah, I think we can probably mention one or two as our like closing out. Any particular ones that come to mind for you all?
There was one that I was thinking of, and now I can't remember it. Was it just Children of the Force? No. Lightsaber Lost. That was it. That was probably my least favorite episode of this series, season. But I know like you guys didn't dislike it as much as I did.
Yeah, I remember. I think that was an interesting discussion. That gave me a lot to think about because I definitely, I did like it quite a lot. I also feel like one of the central complaints you had about it was that it's a very patronizing man being very patronizing to a woman student, and that you probably are by definition, like you're going to be more aware of that dynamic and how it plays out in real life than I am, and so certainly when you pointed that out, that definitely gave me a lot to think about. To me, there was no true like stinkers of episodes like we had in season 1. There's a couple that weren't that great, and a couple of plot lines that I could have kind of done without. But yeah, nothing comes to mind to me as a like, oh god, this was so bad.
Yeah.
Just looking at the list, we also got very little Grievous. I think that's similar to Dooku. They kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that's another plus.
Grievous, is not a very interesting character, but I just like him, and I like the way he's animated. Like, it just makes me cackle whenever he does like the Exorcist spider walk, like when he's escaping.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Or like pulls out 2 extra lightsabers because why not?
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be when they're kind of just leaning into the mustache twirling of like, we're going to be happily like, chewing scenery and having fun with it. And I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. He's like kicking droids out of the rescue ships so that he gets to go when they don't. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
Exactly. That is like just peak ridiculous.
Yeah.
To mistreat your droid army in that way, like, just doesn't really make much sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why are you acting this way?
Because I need one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want cookie. Yeah.
Sorry,
I think he sounds like a Cookie Monster whenever I see him.
And I think that's a good place to end this episode.
I also just like the way he says Kenobi.
Yes.
Ooh, Kenobi.
Yes. Yeah, I love his just personal vendetta against the Jedi, because it's, and when you talked about it, he's not really a droid. He's a cyborg. He's just much more Borg than person anymore. But he doesn't have just no emotions, and it's great. And he's just, I find him much less annoying in the show than I do in the movies, and I do find him, I feel like they're starting to realize, like, you don't have to give us Dooku and Grievous every single episode, that you can have a lot of these other stories. And I realized I forgot, actually looking back over the episode list, Mandalore is great, but this season had what may be my favorite episode in the entire show, which is The Deserter. The one about the clone who kind of leaves and Rex having to come face to face with that thought. So
yeah, that's a really good one.
Well, so fans, what do you think? What do you think of these 2 arcs, and what do you think of the season overall? What are your favorite points? What are your least favorite points? Please let us know. You can find us on Facebook or on Twitter. All that information is in the show notes. You can also find us on email at StarWarsUniversePodcast@gmail.com. If you like the show, one of the best ways you can support us right now is to write a review for us. If you go to iTunes or any other podcatcher that does reviews, but iTunes is the one we know best, type in Star Wars Universe Podcast. We'll come up. Write us a review. 5 stars is great, obviously, but if you're not a great fan of the podcast, that's fine too. Just let us know what either you really like or what we can do better, and it helps us continue to grow continue to do better. But it also helps us grow the podcast, because the more reviews we have, the more people who will see this, and the more people who join the conversation. So, on behalf of myself, thank you so much for Riki and Sarah for being a part of this. Thank you all for listening. Have a great day.
Kenobi.
Kenobi wants cookies.
I like it.